What's going on, everybody? Dr. Vasquez here, trying to fix the camera. So I had said a few weeks ago that I would take on kind of a pet project, which would be providing a few readings, perhaps, maybe reading the whole damn thing, and providing some commentary on Nietzsche's Zarathustra. And in one of my last messages on this same topic, I said that I was going to give up on Walter Kaufmann because I think he's just too dry, and I don't really think he understands Nietzsche. And he says that he doesn't fully understand him himself. And so for that reason, I decided to go back to the translation by R.J. Hollingdale, which I obviously have here. So the three main interpretations of Nietzsche are Kaufmann, Hollingdale, and then of course this wide assortment of other translations, sometimes from experts and sometimes from like entertainment companies that occasionally, however they did it, maybe they hired people who actually knew what they were doing, or maybe they just got lucky or whatever. But some companies that specialize in classical music and classical audiobooks have also produced some really brilliant interpretations, not only of Nietzsche, but in particular Zarathustra. So the third brilliant rendition of Zarathustra comes from a company called Naxos, and I've mentioned their work before. It's just spectacular, absolutely spectacular. So they hired people to not only read the book but also act the book, and it's just wonderful. So I don't really want to compete with them because they're awesome, and I don't think I could ever outdo them. But I have had some interest in kind of reading the book myself, providing an audio version of it, and providing some commentary. The only problem with the Naxos rendition of Thus Spoke Zarathustra is that it's abridged. So they took some parts out. Now, that may not be all bad. According to Kaufmann, the only error in the entire book is the fact that it's just too damn long. And Hollingdale says the same thing. He says, it's great, it's grandiose, but it's too great and it's too grandiose, meaning that maybe Nietzsche got carried away with himself. You would have to understand kind of where Nietzsche was with his life, so to speak. And he wrote Zarathustra basically to serve as his own therapy, because he had gone through a lot of really hard personal ups and downs that culminated in a certain kind of apex of his own personal experience, and that's what Zarathustra is. So Zarathustra is Nietzsche's kind of manifestation of everything good and bad in his life and all of his philosophy. Things were going really well for him, and then they kind of crashed, and that coincided with some events in his own philosophy, and that's the drama of Zarathustra. It's basically him trying to redeem himself, and this has been stated, so I'll just quote it. In the other brilliant rendition of Nietzsche's philosophy by Richard Schott, who's a PhD professor of philosophy at University of Illinois, his description of Zarathustra is that Nietzsche had to redeem himself through creativity by doing something awesome, basically, because his own life obviously had its ups and downs, but they were pretty dramatic ups and downs. And so basically that's what Zarathustra is Nietzsche's kind of creative explosion as he attempts to reconcile his own life and reconcile his philosophy at the same time. So that's why the book is pretty intense. So again, I haven't completely decided how I want to go about doing this. I almost did it last night, and I'm probably glad that I didn't. But I also have a slightly different interpretation of the book after reading some comments by Kaufmann in a different book. And so actually I'm interested in reading the book for my own interest, even though I have read it from page to page. I mentioned that I wanted to read it again. But now that I actually read some comments by Kaufmann, I'm even more interested in reading it, and I'm going to explain that right now. So I read this again last night. Obviously I read it 30 years ago, but I do have a slightly different interpretation of Nietzsche's concept of human all too human. And that's inspiring me to read that book. So Nietzsche wrote a book, I think he wrote it right before Zarathustra, and the name of that book was Human All Too Human. And I have a slightly different interpretation of that book, and so I've started reading that book again, but that also encourages me to read Zarathustra again. So let me see if I can provide a little bit of what the hell I'm talking about by just reading this one paragraph right here. And this will serve as an introduction to Zarathustra as a book, but I'll also use this to explain a few things about Nietzsche's philosophy. So it's only one paragraph. It's the paragraph that I highlighted 30 years ago. So this is the prologue. So this is Kaufmann introducing and summarizing the prologue, which then starts right here. So he says, and remember, I have kind of mixed feelings about Kaufmann's translations and his personal perspectives on this. But anyway, this is still pretty good. Zarathustra speaks of the death of God and proclaims the overman. Faith in God is dead as a matter of cultural fact, and any meaning of life in the sense of a supernatural purpose is gone. So that's obviously a potent statement, but it's a good encapsulation of what's going on with Nietzsche, and it's culturally accurate. So one of the quotes that comes up very early in the book is "God is dead," and that's a famous quote from Nietzsche. In the context of the book, and as Kaufmann just said, Nietzsche isn't saying that. He's not saying it in that context. He's not saying it to attack religion or attack Christianity. He's saying it to describe the fact that people don't live religiously, or that religion isn't enough or doesn't function as enough to sustain us in whatever our modern times were. So obviously Nietzsche lived in the 1800s. But he says, like it or not, he says, he's basically kind of saying, we can give respect to religion, etc. And so some people can choose to remain religious. But he said our society isn't being sustained by religion anymore. And that's what he means when he says God is dead. So, and if you want a good example, I'm sure this will piss some people off, but I obviously don't care. If you want an example of that, look at Donald Trump. I mean, he only touches a Bible when it's a kind of a press conference, or he says, he's got favorite verses, but he can't quote any of them because he obviously isn't reading the Bible. And he doesn't live like any version of what anybody would call like a good Christian. I mean, look at the country, look at his spending habits, look at his social habits. I mean, he just sent out a video last week of him basically shitting on Americans. And I think it was him in a plane wearing a crown, shitting on Americans who were in a protest. But obviously, if he's got a crown on, then he's picturing himself as the king, and he posted this on his own social media. So again, that's an example of what Nietzsche forecasted when he said God is dead. He said people can give lip service to religion, but they don't live religiously. So it is as if God is dead, because lip service or not, people aren't living and being sustained by their religious beliefs that they purport. And again, I mean, Trump's a great example. I'm not picking on him. I would have voted for Trump, given the two options that we had at that time, but that's just picking the lesser of two evils, the way that I saw it. But I wasn't guessing then that he was going to put a crown on his, in a AI video of himself and then send it out on social media with him in a plane dumping, feces on Americans. I don't think that's very American. I don't think it's very adult. I don't think it's very presidential. And it certainly isn't anything related to Christianity, even though on the photo ops, he pretends to be a Christian. So moving on from that. This is the part that I'm interested in this book. Now it is up to man to give his life meaning by raising himself above the animals and the all too human. So if you don't know what all too human means, and it's easy to not understand what that means, then that would be something easy to not really get, not really understand, or just think it's kind of a joke because it's referencing one of his earlier books. But I think it means much more than that. And Kaufmann does a good job. I've criticized him a few times before, but he does a good job. He gets this. Even if he doesn't get some other things, he does get this. So what I think Nietzsche was trying to communicate in his concept of what's called all too human, and he wrote an entire book on it, is that basically what I think he's saying is that being a good human is okay, but it's not really enough. I think he's getting around to saying, or maybe I'm finally understanding this, but he wants people to not live normal lives. He wants people to live exceptionally successful, happy, and creative lives. That's Nietzsche's deal. And so when Nietzsche uses the phrase all too human, he's kind of like saying, yeah, you worked until you didn't work anymore, or you did it your way. I'm sure you all know the song because I just posted it. The song is called I Did It My Way. And it's about living true to oneself in a world that demands compromise and conformity. And on a certain level, we could say that that's good. We could say, oh, well, you were true to yourself. Congratulations. You did a good job. You didn't sell out. You didn't believe the propaganda, etc. That is a certain level of victory. But from a Nietzschean standpoint, he would say, if all you did was live your way and be true to yourself, he says that's pretty damn weak. He said you could have done more than that. And maybe you should have done more than that. So, on a certain level, again, when we're all being kind of corralled into being so conformist, in that setting, thinking independently is an act of triumph in a certain way. However, again, from a Nietzschean standpoint, he would say, is that all you did? All you did was think independently? Like that should be the starting point, not the finish point. So I think that becomes clear in the next sentence. It only has 2 more sentences left in this paragraph. What else is human nature but a euphemism for inertia, cultural conditioning, and what we are before we make something of ourselves? So that's what he means by all too human. That it's nothing more than a euphemism for inertia, cultural conditioning, and what we are before we make something of ourselves. So I think that perspective has value. Yeah, you worked until you didn't want to work anymore, but you didn't make a big effort. And you did it your way. Yeah, but maybe you could have done a lot more. So that's what I'm reading from this in a way that I'm sure I thought that previously, but now I think I get it on a deeper level. Our so-called human nature is precisely what we should do well to overcome. He just said it. Our so-called human nature is precisely what we should do well to overcome. And the man who has overcome it, Zarathustra calls the overman. So within the fiction of Zarathustra is an image, which of course Nietzsche was famous for, called the overman. And the overman is simply somebody who overcomes himself or overcomes herself. So again, for a lot of my life, and I'm just going to explain very briefly and then I'll close this out. For a lot of my own life, I worked really hard. 20 hours a day. Well, that was in medical school, but sometimes when I wasn't in medical school, even when I was living by my own schedule, I was still working, 16 or 18 hours a day. So I never really had to think about overcoming myself, so to speak, because I was living it. I was doing it. I was working sometimes really hard, sometimes arguably too hard, sometimes too hard, yeah. But I guess for me over the last couple of years, I've worked less hard because I've had a lot of distractions. We had the COVID thing. I had my arm injury where I got out of my groove, and I obviously wasn't working hard on work per se for a few months because I had to recover my arm. My arm was really badly injured. So, and immediately thereafter, my mom got cancer, my dad had cancer, my mom died, my dad died, we relocated, and then we just kept relocating and relocating a couple times in succession. Not because we wanted to keep relocating, but we weren't happy with where we ended up. So I think for me, I did a pretty good job, especially in my 30s and 40s, of kind of living the overman. I accomplished a lot and I did a lot of things, but it was a little bit too much at times. But over the last couple of years, as I just said, I've kind of gotten out of that groove. And now I kind of see myself as having the chance to kind of not step back into working as hard, but at least kind of getting back into my game, so to speak. So I felt like I wanted to do that. And then I happen to have gotten a renewed interest in this book, and I find that it's talking about exactly that same theme. So that's what has me interested in this. So, like I said, I had thought about this many years ago, doing kind of a reading of this as a creative project, and now I'm interested in doing it again for a different reason. But I'm also interested in doing it again for kind of a different personal reason, which has just become kind of known to me over the last couple of weeks. So, having said all that, I'm going to do something with this book. I kind of hate to read it like as if I'm trying to create like an audiobook. I kind of don't want to do that because the Naxos version is so perfect. However, the Naxos version is also incomplete. So what I could do, the most efficient way for those of you who are interested to get kind of the best of both worlds would be to access the Naxos audiobook because it's just so fantastic. And then the parts of the book that they don't do, I could read and then maybe even try to explain why they weren't included. You know, why did they cut this out? I have interest in doing that because I have some suspicion that the parts that they cut out were cut out because maybe they were a little too grandiose or whatever, but they might have also been the parts of the book that were maybe a little more difficult to understand, and that might mean that they're actually more interesting. So if I were to approach it from that perspective, then that may actually be more interesting without me having to read the entire book and then edit myself and then fix my errors and all that kind of stuff. So like I said, I'm not really clear on what I'm going to do with it, but I've got a few options. Either I'll read the whole book out loud and make a few comments as I go. I could do that, but other people have already done that, so I don't know if I really need to. Or I could, because I'm so familiar with the Naxos production, I could just look through the book and see what they skipped and then focus in on those parts that are missing from the Naxos version. And then that would give all of us kind of the best of both worlds, so to speak. So anyway, those are my options and ideas. But I'm gonna, as a side project, like I said, I'm gonna play with these books and see what I end up doing. And I still don't know what the answer is gonna be. Hope you're all doing well. Take care. Bye.